It is time for Dying to Bloom with your host, Carrie Potter.
Good morning. This is Carrie Potter. Thanks for joining me on Dying to Bloom, a monthly radio show that talks about burial, funeral options for ourselves and loved ones, as well as how your choice affects the environment, your wallet, and those left to follow through on your choices. I know this is an uncomfortable topic for most people, but let's face it, we are not immortal. We will all die someday. Instead of getting depressed or sad or avoiding that fact, perhaps you can use it to focus on today and on the now. Use it as an inspiration to live and bloom in life. Bigger problems sometimes seem a little bit smaller when you think of the big picture. Think about what you want to accomplish in life, what you'd like to change, and what you have to offer, and go for it. And this show is sponsored by the Green Burial Fund, set up through the Rockland Community Foundation to help bring a green cemetery choice to the Rockland County area. As a reminder, a green cemetery can be a means of land conservation and an environmentally friendly option for burial. Bodies are not embalmed. They can be buried in a biodegradable coffin, such as a weaved coffin, a simple pine box. There are a variety of options out there. And graves are hand dug, so there is minimal disturbance to the land. Trees, plant life remain in their natural state, and it remains a natural habitat for wildlife and conserved land that could be used for hiking and open trails for our enjoyment. In lieu of large marble headstones, one can choose to have an indigenous rock engraved as a marker, or a plant or native flower. Instead of hindering the return to the earth by embalming chemicals and airtight caskets and cement, the body naturally returns to the earth and nourishes it. Thus the name of this show, Dying to Bloom. Please visit rocklandgives.org and donate to the Green Burial Fund so we can have this option available and have an ecologically sound burial and a natural return to the earth. We want to make informed decisions with other large expenses in our life. My first show last month featured author of Grave Matters, Mark Harris, and we discussed, and this is a quote from his book, the average cost of the standard funeral and burial runs $10,000. A typical 10-acre swatch of cemetery ground contains enough coffin wood to construct 40 houses, nearly 1,000 tons of casket steel, 20,000 tons of vault concrete, and enough toxic embalming fluid to fill a backyard swimming pool. Well, guess what? People are returning to natural burial traditions, and you have consumer rights even in funeral and burial purchases. My guest is Joshua Slocum. He's Executive Director of the National Funeral Consumers Alliance and co-author of Final Rights, Reclaiming the American Way of Death. Good morning, Joshua. Are you there?
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Thanks for joining us today.
So what shall we talk about?
Well, Joshua, you know, my interest in green cemeteries led me to the Funeral Consumers Alliance. I found you on the internet. And in early June, I decided to attend the national conference in Minneapolis. So just a kind of a last-minute decision. I decided to leave my family, go to the Funeral Consumers Alliance conference, not knowing what to expect, but I was excited to meet people who actually had similar interests and goals as I do. And that first welcome meeting, out comes this energetic, handsome guy that was so full of positive energy. It was just such a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, thank you. This is very kind words. We do put the fun back in funerals, don't we?
You do.
I was right.
Now, this is a half-hour show, and Joshua, I think you could host your own show for a few hours. You offer so much important information in a fun way. But let's just get started with the basics. What is the Funeral Consumers Alliance, and can you just let people know a little bit about that?
Sure. The Funeral Consumers Alliance is a nonprofit charity. We're an educational organization, so I ask people to think of us like we were Consumer Reports, but just for funerals and burials. I work for the national office that's based in Vermont, and we're headquarters for 80 groups around the country, almost all volunteer-run, that go to their communities and do services such as periodic price surveys of all the funeral homes in a city or a county to help people compare prices ahead of time. Public workshops on how do you fill out that paperwork that you're going to be giving to your kids. Do you want burial or cremation? How much money are you willing to spend on it? We initiate or try to help people initiate that conversation so that they don't do what most of us do, which is never talk about it and then end up at a funeral home one morning with a checkbook in our hand.
Now, there are, this is really important, and thank you for the work you do. And it's important to have an organization that actually looks out for the consumers in the funeral industry. And while there are honest funeral homes out there, let's face it, it can be intimidating and uncomfortable visiting a funeral home. Mm-hmm. I've had that experience, doing that in the death of my parents and a few loved ones. And when you walk into a funeral home, it feels to me a little church-like. You mm-hmm. talk low. You want to be respectful of any bodies in the house. And it can be a little intimidating. What should people know about their rights when they're choosing to go to a funeral home?
Well, and I hope to convince everybody to actually go funeral shopping ahead of time, right? I know that feeling you're talking about. I felt it myself, almost 15 years ago when I was still a newspaper reporter, and I had to go to a funeral home to cover a story. And it was the first time I'd ever been inside a casket showroom. And when he took me down the hallway and opened this door to a dark room and then turned on the lights, and all the fluorescent lights came on, and wow, all of a sudden I was in a room full of boxes for bodies. And it was a sort of surreal experience. But I can tell you, 5 minutes later, that initial fear was gone, and I was completely comfortable having a conversation with the funeral director and asking about options. So when you go to a funeral home, whether you're doing it at the time of death for somebody or beforehand, remember the basics. Number one, the funeral rule. That's the name of a regulation from the Federal Trade Commission that gives you, the funeral consumer, the right to pick and choose only what you want from a funeral home. There's no such thing as a required package. Number two, the funeral home has to give you a printed, itemized price list the minute you come in to discuss arrangements, so you can look at it like a menu. Number three, funeral homes can't refuse a casket if you buy one from outside the mortuary. Number four, they have to disclose truthful information to you so that you can make reasonable decisions. And an example of that is funeral price lists have to let you know that embalming is not usually required by law, which is something that surprises a lot of people. So those are some of the basics.
One of the other things that I found out as I researched and got to know a little bit about the Funeral Consumers Alliance is that we currently don't have active representation here in Rockland County. There is active Funeral Consumers Alliance in our surrounding area, and I was able to meet Gary Gilbert, who's one of the directors of the surrounding areas here in New York, and he, through you, is willing to adopt us into his branch of the Funeral Consumers Alliance, but we need volunteers, and that's one of the things I wanted to do on this radio show is just put a call out there to the listeners. If you're listening and you'd like to help out or become involved, one, I'm going to offer my email, which is dyingtobloom@gmail.com. And Joshua, can you give contact information for yourself?
Oh, absolutely. You can always find us at our website, funerals.org. Make sure you have the S on the word funerals. And my email address is very easy, josh@funerals.org.
Great, thank you. So, and what the volunteers do are, can you explain that, Joshua?
All sorts of fun and morbid things. Seriously, this is an absolutely fascinating way to do volunteer work and to see a really important but very often not discussed portion of human activity. We are all going to deal with funerals and dying, like you said when you introduced the show. You get a chance here to ask the questions that you don't think are socially acceptable. You know, what happens to the bodies? How long can they stay there? Could I do this myself? All these things, these normal, reasonable questions that people have, but they often feel socially pressured not to ask them. Then this is for you. Being able to understand the death business and the death process in a straightforward way not only makes you feel more confident and is going to help you when you have to plan a funeral, but to be honest with you, there's so much absurdity and potential for humor, both dark and a little bit lighter, when we look at this topic, that I find it absolutely fascinating. There's nothing boring about this.
That's for sure. And also in a practical matter, a volunteer can help acquire price information. Is correct?
Yeah, and in fact, that's one of the first things that I suggest anybody do when they get interested in us. One of the most important things we do are periodic price surveys. So usually every 2 to 3 years, our groups will go out to the funeral homes in their service area. It might be a county, it might be a larger or smaller area. And they pick up the price lists that have all of their offerings from burial to cremation, and we put them on a very easy-to-read spreadsheet. So you can look at a list of funeral homes, and you can go down the columns and see that just within one city or county, the price range for exactly the same thing will be tremendous. Not at all uncommon to see one funeral home charging $900 for a simple cremation, and then 10 miles away, another funeral home is charging $2,500 for it. We see the same spread of prices when it comes to burial. You can literally and easily save many thousands of dollars on a funeral, whether you want something simple or elaborate, simply by doing what you would do for any other major purchase, which is shop around.
It makes sense. Even though it's an uncomfortable topic, we're talking money, people.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, we treat, the funeral is an emotional transaction, but what we consumers forget, because we're dealing with a lot at the time, it is also a business transaction. Funeral homes are not your clergy. They're not your spiritual advisors. They are business people. That's fine. But remember that it's business for them. It needs to be business for you, too, when you're the one signing the check. And we really urge people to be clear with themselves and their family on what is important and affordable to them. Don't make the mistake of believing that the amount of love that you show for the deceased that has to be expressed by spending a lot at the funeral home. I have been to funerals that were literally a backyard homespun barbecue, and I've been to funerals that were 2 days and that ended up at a church with an open casket. And I can tell you, the grief is just the same and the family support is just the same, cheap or costly.
I wasn't planning on saying this, but it just came to mind. My son, who's a volunteer fireman, who's also into diesel trucks, showed me a video just last night. He said on his cell phone, he said, "Mom, come here and take a look at this." And it was a video of a young man who recently passed away who is totally into diesel trucks like my son is. And you saw the casket in the back of a diesel pickup truck, and I guess they were revving the diesel engine on his behalf. So it was, that they were considering that honoring this young man who was deceased. So there certainly are unique ways to honor someone's life.
And they don't have, and they're things that don't have to cost money. We've got to decouple commercial expenditure from love, respect, and our feelings for the dead. We need to remember what our mother told us when we were little kids. Love can't be bought by money. And neither can respect or dignity. So people should feel confident, even if their budget is very, very modest. What you do as a family and as a community to celebrate that person's life and the fact that they've left doesn't need to cost anything but your own love.
I am going to open the phone lines if anyone would like to give us a call. The number is 845-362-0013. And this is Dying to Bloom. And on the line with us is Joshua Slocum, who is Executive Director of the National Funeral Consumers Alliance. And as I mentioned a little earlier, you are also co-author of the book. It's called Final Rites, Reclaiming the American Way of Death. I have this book with me in the studio right now, and I think it's a great book because not only does it provide some of the consumer rights information that Joshua was talking about, but it does also list regulations by state. Did you want to offer a little more information about the book?
Yeah, the book is sort of a two-parter. The narrative portion, the first few hundred pages, the meat of the book are, and I guarantee you, at the risk of sounding immodest, it's entertainingly written. I would sooner quit my job than do something boring. So this is not a dry read. I think people will find it fascinating. It looks at what the consumer deals with when they're arranging a cremation, a burial, a prepaid funeral, anatomical donation to science. And my co-author, Lisa Carlson, and I weave through that actual consumer experiences that we have heard and helped people with to illustrate some of the good ways to shop and some of the pitfalls that you'll probably want to avoid. And the rest of the book, as you said, there's a chapter for each of the 50 states, and we take the funeral and burial laws and we put them in plain English for the average reader. It's not full of legalese and statutory language. You're going to open up your New York chapter and you're going to see, oh, the law requires that all funeral homes in New York State have this on their price list. This is the agency that you can file a complaint with if you believe you've been mistreated. All the way into details about, if you have to prepay for a funeral to qualify for Medicaid assistance, how do you go about doing that?
And I do want to go back to the book and also talk about how people can get this book. But we do have a couple callers on the line. Hello, you're on Dying to Bloom.
Yes, good morning, Carrie. Good morning, Joshua. I just had a question. You were talking about funerals and different prices. Is that regulated by, say, region in New York State or, stuff like that? Because if you said that the prices can vary depending on, where and shopping around, is that regulated or not regulated, or, can that vary substantially from one funeral home to another or one area to another?
Sure. No government body, not at the state level and not at the federal level, regulates prices. Funeral homes are allowed to charge as much or as little as they want. What the regulations do say is that all funeral homes in the country have to give you a price list that has itemized options. They have to offer you simple options, and the most common are called direct cremation and immediate burial. And both of these are funeral arrangements that do not include ceremonies or viewing of the body. You can go up from there. But they also have to list out the cost of embalming, the cost of using their facility to view the body, the cost of equipment and staff to come perform a service at the graveside. These things have to be, sort of bullet point by bullet point, and it is that way that people can control their costs. You can both control your costs within the funeral home by what you pick from the price list and what you don't. But more importantly, if you do this ahead of time, you can shop between and among funeral homes. And it really surprises people because most of us go to a funeral home simply because we've been to that one before. And that's not a reason that we would use for any other major purchase. We wouldn't go to the same car dealer simply because we've always gone there and your dad went there before him. We compare the competition. I suggest we do that with funerals as well.
And is that staying within the same state, or let's say you have a funeral home or facility close by your own state and it happens to be in a different state? How would that play?
Well, if you want to do business with somebody, say, who's over the line in Vermont, give them a call. There's nothing illegal about you're not required to use a funeral home within a particular geographic location.
Right. So if you're locally near, one area, you can use another funeral home, you're saying?
Absolutely. And remember, folks, if you're not using the funeral home as a physical gathering space that mourners and survivors are going to come to, so, for example, let's say you're having an immediate burial with no viewing, the location of the funeral home is not as important. You might say, oh, well, we'll just use the closest one. Well, if the one a mile away is charging $3,000, but maybe there's a funeral home 15 miles up the road that's charging half that price, I think it's a better deal to go with the one a little further away.
And what if it's in another state, and then you have the funeral here or something like that? Is that really a difference?
No, there's no legal difference. It's just a matter of whether or not the business you choose is close enough that it works for you, and if geography is not an issue, then that's fine.
Right. Okay, whatever works for you then.
Mark?
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks for calling. Josh, just back to your book for a moment. There was an interesting note on the back that Americans push towards the rights in natural childbirth, rights in end of life as far as hospice care goes, and now we are taking charge of how we go out, handling arrangements, home burials, green burials, and direct arrangements. So I think that's really interesting, and that's one of the reasons I'm so happy to have you as a guest here on Dying to Bloom, because I think it's important for people to know there is a Consumers Alliance out there for the funeral purchases. And can you tell us the website and how people can, do a little more research?
Yeah, visit us at funerals.org, funerals.org. And up at the top, you'll see a For Consumers link. You'll see a link that says Find a Local Funeral Consumers Alliance, and that's where you can see if there's a chapter near you. And if there isn't, and you're interested in what we do, shoot me an email. People like Carrie and I can get things together, get people together who may be interested. We would love to see the first price survey in Rockland County, for example, and we've got lots of materials to help people. We've got a manual. We've got a worksheet. We can help you do it in a standard way, but it really is, not only will it open your eyes when you start to see this huge range of prices, but it tends to open other people's eyes, and it gives them permission to start asking questions like, wow, why are those prices different? Most people don't realize that, and it's part of a set of beliefs that I call mortuary mythology, that we all walk around thinking we know, but that is basically about on the level of urban legend. People a lot think that embalming is always required by law. It's not. People think that the grave vaults and enclosures in the ground are legal requirements to put the coffin in. They're not. They're cemetery requirements. So much of what we think we know about funerals really came from the person who had an interest in selling it to us. So we're here to be objective for you. And
can people obtain your book through the website? And is there any other way to get your book, Final Rights?
Sure. The book is both in print and in ebook format. We sell the book for $22.50 at funerals.org, and the vast majority of that goes directly to FCA's charitable mission. Your author here gets a royalty of about a quarter or 50 cents, so it's not going to break me one way or another, but it certainly helps Funeral Consumers Alliance. Amazon beats our price, obviously. And I have a Kindle version, which I absolutely love because I can take it with me and quickly find the state chapter that I need if I'm on the road and doing business. So,
well, I happen to have the regular print version, which I'm a book person. I like to be able to carry it around and flip through the pages.
I have that, and I have that too, and it's actually on my lap right now as we talk, so yes.
And also the Funeral Consumers Alliance offers other literature. I believe you have a booklet to help people think things through and prepare for their funeral. Can you tell us what that is and how it can help?
95% of everything we have on our site is absolutely free. As a charitable nonprofit, we want to disseminate this information widely. So there's at least 20 articles that could also be printed as brochures if you want in the consumer section that go from whether or not to prepay a funeral to what to do with the ashes if you choose cremation, veterans issues. But we also have a workbook called Before I Go, You Should Know. It's a 35-page spiral-bound planner that asks you to sit down with your family, decide what your funeral budget is, decide what's emotionally or spiritually important to you and what isn't, and then write those details out. And it's going to be not just, I'd like a massive Christian burial. We go into more detail. You know, were you a woodworker? Did you have a coffin stuffed away in your garage? Some grandpas do. There's places to put down who needs to call your vet. Do your pets take medications? Where are your insurance papers? That is $15 on our site. Most of the rest of what we have is absolutely free.
That sounds like a great resource. Before I go,
you should know.
You should know. And
if anybody here is a fan of the late artist Edward Gorey, who did these sort of charming Edwardian style pencil drawings that were a little bit kooky and morbid, he animated the opening sequence to PBS's Mystery. He very kindly, before he died, gave us permission to use his artwork to illustrate this book, and it really is a one of a kind.
Hello, caller. You're on the air on Dying to Bloom.
Hi, I just wanted to know the name of the book.
Yes, and this is important. It's Final Rights. Rights is spelled R-I-G-H-T-S. The subtitle is Reclaiming the American Way of Death. And yes, it is very much a playoff of Jessica Mitford's famous book, The American Way of Death, first published in 1963 when we were a brand new organization.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And also, I encourage everyone to visit the website.
Funerals, with an S, funerals.org.
All right, funerals.org, because you can find, again, Joshua's book there if you forget the name of it, and also the workbook that he was talking about, Before I Go, You Should Know, which just seems to make a lot of sense.
And there's lots of space on our site to start a conversation. If there's a question you have about something, if you see a news article we put up, leave us a comment on there.
And Joshua, is there any other final words or tips you can offer us as consumers on things to look out for, to be aware of, and be educated on?
I think the most important thing is everybody listening, please do this today or do it soon. Have this conversation. You are not too young, and talking about it is not going to make you die. Even I, who make my living doing this, working for this organization, I wasn't as prepared as I should have been 3 years ago when I had a surprise heart attack at the age of 36. So if I can procrastinate, I know anybody can. Please don't. It really, really will help if you start to treat funeral planning as part of the ordinary business of running a family and do it today.
Joshua, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you will join us again on Dying to Bloom, and thank you for the work you do on behalf of all us consumers out here that will die someday.
Thank you, Carrie. It was great to meet you, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Take care.
Bye.
Well, as I start this show closing here, I'd like to thank you for joining me again on Dying to Bloom and ask you to consider contributing to the Green Cemetery Fund with the Rockland Community Foundation. You can visit rocklandgives.org and scroll through the list of funds and look for the Green Cemetery Fund. It's not easy for us to think that our life will come to an end. Let's use that thought to encourage ourselves to live life to the fullest. I closed my first show, and I'm going to close every show quoting Bronnie Ware, an Australian nurse who spent several years working in palliative care and the author of the best-selling memoir, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Number 1, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Number 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Number 3, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. Number 4, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And number 5, I wish that I had let myself be happier. That concludes today's Dying to Bloom. Join me next month, Carrie Potter, and be happy.